Hey, Cloudcast community, listen up. Today's show is sponsored by Datadog, a cloud-scale monitoring and analytics platform. Datadog was built to bring clarity to complex dynamic applications, whether they're in the cloud, on-prem, in containers, or wherever you run your applications. With powerful dashboards, seamless integrations, and more than 250 technologies they can monitor, Datadog has you covered. Whether it's AWS, Azure, or Google services, your popular open source projects and products, or web security and APIs, Datadog can help you monitor them and help you collaborate around troubleshooting them and make sure they're running great. Datadog provides deep end-to-end visibility into the health and performance of modern applications. So, try it yourself. Get yourself a free 14-day trial. Go to datadoghq.com/cloudcast. That's datadoghq.com/cloudcast to try out your free 14-day trial. And if you try it out, let them know your friends at Cloudcast sent you, and they'll send you a great, wonderful, soft, awesome t-shirt with the Datadog logo on it. I wear mine all the time. So once again, that's datadoghq.com/cloudcast. Thanks for listening, and here comes the show.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. You know, it's been an interesting week in terms of the tech news, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but good to have everybody back this week. We are still kicking into spring. The weather's getting better. My voice probably sounds a little hoarse because it is incredibly polleny here in Raleigh, but hopefully that goes away soon. Anyways, let's get to the news of the week, the cloud news of the week. The first news of the week is that Chef, who has for a very long time been, extremely well known in the automation space and so forth, kind of one of the really early pioneers in the automation space that now kind of gets talked about as, Chef, Puppet, Ansible, and Salt. With a lot of the changes happening in open source licensing that's going on with a lot of companies, with some of the cloud providers getting involved with it, Chef's founder, Adam Jacobs, has always been very adamant about the importance of open source. And so there was a big announcement this week. Chef has announced that all of its software will be open source, no longer having any sort of open core part of what they do. Obviously, there's still some nuances in terms of how the licensing works for things like trademarks and so forth. But, I think this is probably a topic that we're going to have to dig into fairly soon, kind of this interaction between open source licensing, open source, companies that are building on top of open source technologies, what they're doing. We're seeing a lot of different options that companies are moving into, whether it's, open core, whether it's changing their licensing to sort of prevent ultimately, the big cloud providers from trying to, take their technology, legally, but take over a lot of their business and so forth. So definitely a topic we're going to want to dig into, and there are lots of different points of view. So, big announcement from Chef around that space. Second thing was, this is probably about a week old, so if you've heard it, apologies. Microsoft announced Azure Stack HCI. So Microsoft has for a very long time had Azure Stack, which is kind of their on-premise version of services from the Azure cloud, trying to represent those. This is kind of a variation on that. I think this is really Azure or Microsoft trying to realize that, within the data center space, there's still a lot of growth around HCI. So this is sort of positioned as, more for VM-centric workloads, Hyper-V type of workloads, but in an HCI type of form factor. So interesting to see Microsoft getting into the HCI space that obviously people like, Nutanix and VMware and NetApp and lots of others are in that space today. And then there was a number of things that were announced. Aqua Security, who is a Cloudcast alum, was on last year, took a $62 million round of funding. Portworx, who is a storage company around the Kubernetes and container space, took a $27 million round of funding. So it's good to see healthy investment continue around the Kubernetes space for both of those companies, and there have been a few others here recently. And then I wanted to highlight a couple of articles that I thought were sort of interesting on topics that we will probably cover at some point. The New Stack had a very good article called The Rise of Progressive Delivery for System Resilience. And this really kind of spun out of a concept that James Governor from RedMonk has been, beginning to talk about. I know I talked with him sort of in November of last year about it. And we kind of got into CI/CD, and it was really the, what do you do does there need to be a different sort of thinking around companies that aren't, doing the 10 deploy, 100 deploy a day, but are doing some sort of evolutionary advancements with their software on a regular basis? So James is now talking about this sort of concept of progressive delivery. So good article there. There was a good article from Crunchbase looking at the top 101 SaaS companies, their CEOs and salaries and stuff. So if you're curious about those things, lots of things about what salary looks like and other compensations look like for the SaaS companies. Obviously we talked to Anil a couple weeks ago about what the SaaS business model looks like. So, good for reference for people looking at that. And then finally, there was a nice article that was written. It was in Forbes, and it really was looking at kind of the disconnect between what's being taught in the business schools today, the MBA programs, and kind of how technology has evolved. So, for example, if you're, in finance, how much is analytics and predictive and AI stuff being taught? If you're in marketing, is it still sort of the old, 4 Ps types of things, or is it really more about the new ways that people are doing marketing and so forth? So, kind of a nice intersection between what's being taught in business schools and or not being taught in business schools, and really the evolution of technology and the things that have been learned from startup companies, companies that are growing very quickly, companies that are leveraging new mediums to get their products and services to market. So, again, a couple of announcements, a couple of really good articles for people to start thinking about things that are evolving. So with that, we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank our sponsors for this week, both Datadog and MongoDB. And with that, we're going to get to our guest. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of the evolution of engineering career paths. We've talked about other career paths. We're going to talk about that real quick coming up next. Today's Cloudcast is sponsored by MongoDB. As a software engineer, chances are you've crossed paths with MongoDB at some point, whether you're building an app for millions of users or just figuring out a side hustle or a new project. As the most popular non-relational database, MongoDB is intuitive and incredibly easy for development teams to use. Now, with MongoDB Atlas, you can take advantage of MongoDB's flexible document data model as a fully automated cloud service. MongoDB Atlas handles all the costly database operations and admin tasks that you'd rather not spend time on, like security, high availability, data recovery, monitoring, and elastic scaling. So go try MongoDB Atlas today. You can visit mongodb.com/cloudcast to learn more. And we're back. It is good to be back with everybody this week. One of the topics that always comes up, especially between Aaron and I, because a lot of the people that we know through the industry maybe are on the sales and marketing side of technology companies or within their company, is always about, what do I do next in my career? What are the things that I should align to, whether it's personal growth or technology alignment or, a new title or whatever that might be. Well, one of the things that we haven't really ever explored in a lot of depth, and we've always wanted to, is what does this look like on more of the engineering side, the technology side of our industry, whether it's at a company that is considered sort of a vendor or a public service, or on the IT side of things, more from the engineering side of things. And so, very, very excited today to kind of dive into that, dig into a little bit more. Today's guest is Uma Chingunde, who is engineering manager at Stripe. Uma, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So very excited to have you on today. Why don't we start with some basic things? Let's talk a little bit about your background, things that you've done in the past and really what brought you to Stripe and maybe some of the interesting things that you work on at Stripe.
Sure. I'll start. I started my career in engineering way back when. I actually started my career as in working in India. And then I moved to the US for graduate studies. And I've always had like a lifelong kind of, love for like more complicated systems and puzzles. And so that drew me to systems overall. And I took a lot of courses in operating systems, file systems, storage, distributed systems. And so I started as an engineer at VMware. This was back in 2008. And I worked on many cool products there. I spent a while as an IC, and then I became a manager later for the team that I actually was an IC on. And I was a manager at VMware for a while. I then explored a startup for a couple of years as an engineering manager, and now I'm at Stripe, also managing a group of teams.
Yeah. So, I heard an interesting sort of tidbit the other day. Somebody mentioned, between AWS and Stripe, if those two companies didn't exist, you wouldn't have 60, 70, 80% of the startups that are out there doing interesting things. For anybody that doesn't know who Stripe is, give us a real quick overview of the company.
Sure. The mission of our company is actually like a really good place to start. Our mission is increasing the GDP of the internet. And where we started was actually enabling payments. So if you are a company that wants to be online and wants to accept payments on the web, Stripe is the place that makes it seamless and easy for you. We essentially provide a API that allows you to essentially plug in and start accepting money. And we are, if you are in the US, you have probably had a transaction on Stripe because we are built into so many various things.
Right. And you manage essentially the compute team, a lot of the infrastructure team for Stripe, right?
Yes, I do that. So what that actually means for people that are less familiar with the kind of the inner workings of Stripe is I'm actually on the infrastructure team. So most SaaS companies will have a team like mine. I'm one of the sub teams within the larger foundation group. That's what our infrastructure team is called. And compute is essentially kind of, as the name describes, the compute of Stripe. We're essentially providing secure, reliable infrastructure for the rest of Stripe.
Right. Yeah. Obviously, really important fundamental building blocks for, like you said, not only Stripe as a company, but because of the importance of Stripe's service and like you said, growing the GDP of the internet, a foundational building block for sort of online transactions. So very, very important stuff. Like I mentioned in the intro, we've dug in at various points in times with people that are going through transitions in their career. You have a chance here coming up in June or July at the Velocity Conference to talk about some of your thought process, both as an individual contributor and as a manager of, how do people think about career changes, career advancement, whether that's, maybe upward or horizontal. Can we start? Let's talk a little bit about kind of the framework, the way that you think about, people's engineering career, either getting in as an IC, advancing as an engineer, kind of how do you frame the discussion that you tend to have around this?
Yeah, sure. I'll start with some background, which is a lot of like where I am is kind of as kind of like looking backwards. As in, I was actually never someone who very consciously thought about career ladders beyond like the very kind of straight and narrow. As in, like, I am a junior IC, I need to kind of, become like a more senior one, grow my skill set. And then I was given the opportunity to try out being a manager. And so I took that and I've kind of done that. So a lot of what I've actually, and it's only in the last few years, what has actually prompted this kind of a lot more thought from my end has actually been, as an engineering manager, supporting other people and helping them kind of navigate their career ladders. One of the things that drew me to engineering management originally was that I really enjoy mentoring folks. I help watching other people grow in their careers, and it was kind of in the pursuit of that I've kind of a little bit like taken, as I describe it, my debugging skills and kind of tried to debug career paths a little bit. The way I frame it is that your typical career ladder at an engineering company is just the beginning, and it should actually be like the beginning of where you start thinking versus the boundaries of where you think. So that should be kind of like the basis of where you actually start exploring, but most of your like thinking about your career should actually be far beyond that, because the career ladders are things that are very narrow and they're like very focused and are essentially an attempt to provide structure within a company. But from the perspective of someone who's building out your career, you actually should use that as a guideline versus as the kind of like the parameters of your search. So one of the things I like to think about is thinking ahead. Like the way I frame it to folks is that I support is like, where do you want to be and what are your goals? And then how can I as a manager help you support those? And so you kind of have to know where you want to be, and then try to actually fit your career ladder and the opportunities within your organization to meet those long-term goals. And one way of thinking about that is actually like beyond the standard promotion track, because the standard promotion track can be quite restrictive, and is also like, I think of it as being more short-term. as an example, if you are an individual contributor, but maybe you're thinking of management as a longer term career goal, there are so many things that you can actually start building on without ever having to have the role of a manager. You can build your people skills, you build mentoring, you build planning, you build strategic thinking. And all of these are actually like very accessible as engineers and will only help you be a better manager. And I think there's also just this really interesting concept of going back and forth between different ladders. And so I always encourage people to actually think of your career as kind of like somewhere where you want to go, but you're kind of like gathering tools along the way that will help you get there versus a straight ladder that you have to go straight up.
Yeah. No, I think there's some really important points that you highlight in there. A couple of them that I've had a chance to do as I was managing people. And I think one of the first things that I often see with people that are individual contributors who are, thinking about their future, they'll come to you and they'll say things like, well, I want to advance, whatever advancing means. And in a lot of cases they go, I don't really know what else is out there, right? They know maybe what the next step in their path is. Like you said, linearly, they go from being junior to, intermediate or junior to senior. Do you find yourself sometimes saying, well, let me expose you to at least parts of some of those other types of jobs so that you get a view of what they look like? Is that something that you've found is useful?
Yes. I actually do that. I encourage them like either to, it depends on the degree to which they're interested in. As an example, like, the most common question I often get asked is like, what is it like being a manager? And I feel like well equipped to answer that. And so I talk through my experience. In cases where I'm not as well equipped, I actually encourage people to go talk to people that are in that position. And something that I think I really wish more companies did that Stripe does really well is rotations. So actually allowing people to do mini rotations in different parts of the company. And this can be not just in an engineering team. You can actually do these across a variety of roles. So I think that's actually a really powerful way for people to experience different opportunities and think about what that might mean for them. In kind of the past, I've had folks that have expressed an interest in product management that comes up often, engineering management that comes up often. So I really help. I see my job as facilitating that conversation versus giving them a set of guidelines.
Yeah, no, I think that's valuable. I think it's a good thing to not necessarily kind of. The word isn't force it, but sort of let them, introduce them, make an opening for them to go see what's there, but then let them go experience it through their eyes. I think that's like what you said is really important because your experience versus their experience or their expectation could be very, very different. The other thing that I thought you mentioned just a few minutes ago that I think is really important is this idea that these ladders that we lay out for various career paths, people don't always have to stay on one ladder. They may choose to move up one ladder. It could be, in an individual contributor path. It could be in an engineering path. It could be, like you said, they move over to product management. But I think it's important for people to realize that sometimes you go down one of these other paths and you realize I really miss some part of that other thing. And people do come back. They move from, say, engineering to product management and they're capable of doing that because they learn some of those other skills that you mentioned, whether it's people skills or project timing skills and so forth.
Yes, I strongly believe in that. And something that I use as a kind of starting point to discuss this is often it's well accepted and almost it is a default that most engineering managers have spent some time being engineers themselves. That's almost like a prerequisite. I've actually rarely met an engineering manager who has not been an IC at some point. And the same goes for all various other disciplines, wherever you are, further high, kind of in the hierarchy, you kind of started off the expectation that you started off being an individual contributor there. So we expect this kind of journey to go in one direction, but there seems to be less of a precedent in the other direction. And I think that's where I feel there's actually a lot more to explore, which is something that struck me when I was still early in my management career, was how much of a better engineer I could have been if I'd actually experienced my manager's experience a little more, because I could see the situation from her eyes once I was a manager, and I appreciated her kind of viewpoint far more. And I think some of the best engineers I have worked with have spent time in like multiple roles, and that just gives them a much broader perspective. And this also applies to like different parts of the stack. As an example, like, I think it's people that have had like different areas of expertise. Essentially, like, you may have been an infrastructure engineer, and it's really valuable to actually be a product engineer and experience what our users are going through, and vice versa for a more product or user facing engineer to actually like experience what infrastructure looks like. Those tend to be like give very valuable perspectives.
Yeah, no, I very much agree with that. I think there are now so many aspects of where engineering gets involved in pieces in the business, whether it's, your sort of experience with customers, kind of user experience things, whether it's, back-end scaling, whether it's trying to help translate between some business requirement and what's technically possible. So yeah, I think that's a really valuable insight you pointed out, is that there are so many disciplines within engineering. It's useful to cross-pollinate those types of things. One of the things that I'm sure you run into at Stripe, obviously you've worked at some other companies that are very dynamic companies. There's a lot of new technologies that are coming along, what sometimes feels like more rapidly than before. And sometimes, those of us that are maybe like creating the technologies or marketing the technologies, we just go, hey, people that are going to use this, just start using it. And we forget the learning curve that it takes to learn new things. You've got to find time away from what you do. How do you think about keeping your people up to speed and giving them opportunities to train and learn new things? Or, do you have a kind of a cultural perspective on that, or a thought process in terms of how you want to help your people keep up to speed on, what they do today, but also new things?
I think that's a really good question. And I think the best way that I've seen is actually making sure that your teams are healthy and functioning in a way that they actually have the space to explore other things. So in an ideal world, you're actually you're operating in a way where your team is not so swamped that they have like no extra time to kind of go explore things, and that kind of gives you this little extra time to go investigate new technologies and learn a little more. You want to create that culture where you encourage that, and where you kind of create a culture of more continuous learning. And more importantly, also create some space in the team that's kind of valued to share that. And I think there's many different formats in which this can be done. You can do it via explicit time that you set aside for the team, where you give them time to go and explore things. You can do it by having time for sharing purely. That's something that we do a lot of at Stripe personally. My team likes to do what they call team learning sessions. We also do a series of tech talks where the goal is essentially to share what you have learned with the rest of the team. And I think probably the most important aspect here is actually making sure that what you are also working on isn't getting stale. So kind of actually continuously updating what your stack looks like at a sustainable pace. So you do, to a degree, actually want to have some amount of adoption of that new technology in whatever you're working on, to the degree that your infrastructure can support it.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that you identify it as not something that should be separate from what they do, sort of a parallel path of what they do, but make it part of their regular day-to-day thing, right? They have to sort of allocate some time to learning, but also, you're kind of actively trying to bring new things into the stuff that will be their day-to-day work, into your core architecture, so that you're learning all the time, keep them interested, and so forth. No, I think that's a great perspective on that.
Yeah. And I think just to kind of elaborate on that a little bit, it's something that I've actually feel strongly is actually required to create a healthy workplace that actually attracts new people. Because one of the dangers that I've actually noticed at places that kind of are larger and tend to become more static is that if you're using outdated tools and technology, after a while, you'll actually lose the ability to attract people to come work there, because people want to work on things that are easy to use, and they want to use more up-to-date technology. It's like nothing frustrates engineers more than working a set of outdated tools.
Right. Yeah. They want to work smartly. They don't want to feel like they're wasting their time. I want to shift gears a little bit. Obviously, I notice, if I look at like your Twitter bio, for example, you very prominently identify, engineer, mother. And, for somebody who, I have daughters, my wife is in the workplace. I understand from colleagues and so forth, the requirements or the demands of motherhood and on women is different sometimes than the men on your team. How do you think about balancing that kind of? You obviously would have a different perspective than I would have in terms of having empathy towards a kind of a broader set of diversity in your team. How do you try and bring together both the strengths of a diverse team, especially having the perspectives that you have, but also bringing the creativity and the different viewpoints together by having that diverse team, by having a good healthy mix of men and women and so forth in your team?
This is a really good question, and I think to start with, I think. One, I think I do have it like easier than a lot of people would imagine. One is I have a lot of support. I have one child and she's 5, and then as all parents know, they kind of tend to get much easier once you're past the infant stage. So just with that, I guess I just kind of wanted to share that I no longer feel like I am having to balance as much as like I have, or maybe just that I've like really gotten used to it. So with that, I think other things is. The reason I, for instance, put that in my Twitter bio was actually to kind of share and like a big kind of part of me, because that's an important part of me. Mm-hmm. And I feel that one of the most useful things that people that are more senior or like are in leadership positions can do is actually model the behavior that you want. So I'm never shy about talking about my child or mentioning that I need to leave work early to pick her up from school, or that I need to take the day off. Because she's sick, or similar things. I've actually jokingly described it as being on the parent on call, and yeah. that's quite literally what it is, right? Like you're the primary, and you're like you get paged, and so you have to drop everything you're doing and go pick up your kid, because that's what needs to happen if they're sick. And I think just like being very open about it really helps. I find that my workplace is very supportive. And I think that something that I've also emphasized to other people, and particularly like anyone that's kind of an underrepresented person, is that it's rare to find a workplace that's healthy in all dimensions, but then is like particularly bad only on like inclusivity or like some sort of like health indicator. A place that is kind of generally healthy and supportive and inclusive will, like by necessity, have to be good in multiple dimensions. And if you have, it's rare to find a workplace that's like very well functioning in all dimensions, but then happens to be like terrible for like one set of people. It's just like the people that make unhealthy work environments tend to do that for multiple groups of people. And so when you're like, it's actually in the interest of everyone to kind of, create that. So something that kind of I talk about is that the reason it's actually so easy for me in my current workplace is that we're a very distributed team. And so people are in many different time zones. So we're all very attuned to having kind of, a high regard for like, that it might not be the best time for someone to respond immediately to something, or that because it might literally be like, midnight in the UK, which is where someone on my team actually lives. So that I think has created like a very understanding and very collaborative culture. And I think always thinking about this through multiple lenses is what actually I find to be the most useful.
Yeah, no, I think that's great insight. I think that what I think is so powerful, and you sort of highlighted this, is it's really important to not only that you make, that's kind of the duality of what you do, right? The importance of work, the importance of family visible, right? You let everybody know on your team that, hey, I'm going to be as good as I can when I'm here, but when I need to be there for my family, or like you said, you're, a mom on call, you make that visible. And I think that's really important, because what it does is it lets other people know that, hey, there are things that are just as important as what we do in our job, and you can feel comfortable saying, "Hey, I have this thing I have to do. Can I make sure that I get there? I want to be at my child's event, or I'm just going to have some things at times that have to be higher priority." And I think when managers make that visible, when they don't make it sort of a taboo to talk about, or they don't make it uncomfortable, it does allow people to to find that right balance for themselves. And I think you highlighting it, whether it's in small ways or in big ways, I'm sure gives your team a sense of like, oh, great, we can find what's the best thing for us to collectively work together, achieve our goals, but also find the right balance with our family and do things outside of work.
Yeah, and I just want to point out that you don't have to be a parent or be in one of the kind of groups to model this behavior.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I appreciate where I work is that I find that everyone that I work with actually models this behavior, irrespective of what their commitments are. Having a healthy kind of boundary setting is kind of is good behavior that just helps everyone. And I really appreciate the fact that all my colleagues do this.
Yeah, no, that's good to point out. Let me ask you one last question, because we've talked a lot about sort of the people and culture side of things. Like we mentioned, Stripe is doing very interesting things, web scale types of things. You're still an engineering manager. You have some passions around the technology. What are some of the technologies that you're either exploring or things that you get to work on today that get you really excited about being at work or about learning new things?
I think the list is quite long, actually, and I think one of the most interesting things for me has actually been by working at Stripe. I've actually taken a pretty a kind of detour from where I used to work previously. So honestly, pretty much everything that I work on has been really interesting to me. For since I talked about it a bit before, for folks that aren't familiar, VMware kind of produces software for data centers, versus at Stripe we run very much SaaS style, and we're a full SaaS product, and we heavily use cloud providers, where we heavily use lots of open source technology. So I'm learning a lot, and everything here is actually new and exciting. I think what I find is interesting, particularly about Stripe, is right now that's kind of really exciting for me is just our huge focus on launching in new countries. And before I joined Stripe, I would not have imagined the amount of work and the amount of thought and the amount of technical challenges there are with launching something that's essentially a payments product in multiple countries. And it's really interesting, all the technical challenges that are to be solved. As an example, it's kind of we're expanding in many different countries, and there's many different regulations in Asia that are different from the ones that are in Europe. And it's really interesting how you can actually solve those from a technical standpoint versus things that we typically think of as being regulation.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I can imagine that, like you said, moving from a company that, say VMware, where you're only thinking about infrastructure, to a company that has to think about finance, financial regulations, markets. It's going to expand your thought process and expand your horizon in terms of, I have to go learn those things, and then I have to translate them back to how we can make them really interesting from a technology perspective. Well, listen, Uma, thank you so much. This is for me, it's been very, very interesting. I love kind of getting different perspectives from people who are, working in different areas, people that are successfully doing new things. So thank you so much for the time today. I've really enjoyed the conversation. If anybody wanted to reach out to you or kind of learn more about the types of things that you're doing, maybe you're hiring or just kind of wants to pick your brain about, leadership tracks and career tracks, how might people be able to get in touch with you? Or
Twitter is probably the easiest way to find me. I have a pretty unique name, so I'm easily searchable, which is kind of unfortunate, but it is what it is. So Twitter or LinkedIn are usually the easiest ways to find me. Twitter probably be the the easiest.
Okay, and we will get your Twitter handle in the show notes, so people can easily kind of if they want to reach out and make a comment or pick your brain, that would be great. Well, listen, thank you so much for the time today, folks. Really enjoyed today's talk, folks. Thanks so much for always telling a friend about the show, for rating on iTunes and helping us grow the show. For Uma and for Aaron, who couldn't be here today, thank you to everybody for listening, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.